Mr. President, all across the country, Americans are stepping up in response to the coronavirus pandemic sweeping our nation. Doctors and nurses are working endless hours and putting themselves at risk to care for the surge in patients. Manufacturers, including many companies in my state, are working overtime and retooling their product lines to produce medical testing swabs, ventilators, and personal protective equipment, all of which are vitally needed. Truckers are going above and beyond, missing time with their families so that they can deliver goods needed to restock depleted grocery shelves. People are looking out for their neighbors in a safe way. They're checking on them. They're making personal sacrifices to help prevent the virus from spreading to the most vulnerable members of our society. Help is on the horizon for small businesses and their employees who are facing economic devastation through no fault of their own. Mr. President, I have talked to small business owners all across our state, including small mom-and-pop operations like a third-generation diner operated and owned by the Simonis family in Lewiston, Maine. For the first time ever in 3 generations, they have had to close their doors. They've had no choice. As Linda Simonis told me in tears earlier this week, we've never been unemployed. Our son is unemployed. Our friends who have worked with us at this diner for years are unemployed. Mr. President, the agreement finally reached today includes a $377 billion small business economic relief plan that Senator Rubio, Senator Cardin, Senator Shaheen, and I authored as members of the Small Business Task Force. It is intended to help workers and small businesses just like the one owned by the Simonis family in Lewiston. And our group worked day and night to get this bipartisan package included in the broader legislation. And I want to do a shout out to our staff because I don't think they've been to bed before 4 a.m. in the morning in any day in the last week. That's how hard they've worked too. Under our bipartisan approach, small businesses would be eligible for a 100% federally guaranteed emergency loan to cover 8 weeks of payroll, as well as certain expenses like rent or mortgage payments and utilities. If these businesses keep their employees on the payroll, in other words, if they keep issuing those paychecks, their loans would be completely forgiven. Here's how it would work. Small employers with 500 employees or fewer would be eligible to apply for these federally guaranteed loans. The loans would be available immediately through existing Small Business Administration certified lenders, including certain banks, credit unions, and other financial institutions. And a streamlined process would be created to bring other additional lenders into the program. The size of the loans would be tied to a formula based on the small business's average monthly payroll, and that would go back to February 15th, since that's when the coronavirus really started to come to our country and have an impact. The maximum loan amount would be $10 million. So as long as these small businesses retain their employees and issue those paychecks, which, keep in mind, also means in many cases that those employees will get their health insurance as well. The portion of the loan used to cover payroll and mortgage, interest, rent, and utility payments would also be forgiven. Furthermore, and this is important to states like those of the presiding officer and mine, which have large numbers of tourists coming each year, employers with tipped employees would receive forgiveness for the additional wages paid to such employees. In addition, I want to point out that workers who have already lost their jobs due to this crisis can be rehired and paid under our program, and that should be our goal. Mr. President, this vital assistance cannot come a moment too soon. There are so many small businesses that have already shut down or are on the verge of doing so. They are trying to hang on just a little longer to avoid laying off their employees who are like members of their own family. In fact, in many cases, they are members of their own family. Without this package, we face an unemployment tsunami that could reach as high as 20%, according to the Secretary of the Treasury. Not only would this cause tremendous harm to millions of families, but it would also take a massive toll on the federal budget, far exceeding the $377 billion that we're using for this small business assistance program to keep workers paid and employed. What we want is to make sure those small businesses survive, that they're here when we've transcended this crisis, and that their employees are still able to come back to work for them. We don't want to break that link, that connection. We don't want those small businesses to give up and shutter their doors forever, decimating our downtowns and causing permanent job loss for the workers that are so much a part of their business. Now, larger businesses that are facing cash flow issues would be eligible for certain loans so that they can avoid laying off their workers. However, unlike the small business assistance programs, which would have their loans forgiven as long as they keep their workers employed, the larger businesses would be required to repay these loans in full. And I want to make clear that these large businesses would be barred from stock buybacks and increasing executive pay for the duration of the loan. And I fully support those restrictions. Of course, many of those small businesses don't have shareholders, so the idea of a stock buyback doesn't exist. Now, some of them, Subchapter S may, but many of them do not. I'm also pleased to say that we would cover the sole proprietor, the independent contractor, those many individuals who we rely upon to make our economy work. Mr. President, following my advocacy along with members from other coastal states, I'm also pleased that the bill includes $300 million to assist workers and businesses in our nation's fisheries, which support thousands of jobs in the great state of Maine. With this legislation, harvesters, fishing communities, aquaculture operations, and other fishery-related businesses will be eligible for this $300 million in assistance, which may include some direct relief payments. This helps protect our food supply chains, and this targeted relief Relief will help ensure that the families and the coastal communities that depend on our fisheries can emerge from this crisis. Similar assistance is provided to our farmers as well. Mr. President, this bill also provides more than $30 billion for states, school districts, colleges, and universities to help them meet the unexpected expenses that have flowed from the coronavirus crisis. Our schools, our K-12 schools, will have access to $13.5 billion, which will help them support remote learning and meeting the needs of their students. And I want to take a moment to recognize the dedication of those teachers, administrators, school food service workers, and bus drivers who are not only making sure that students have access to remote learning, but are making sure that students have access to meals off-site. This bill provides funding to help them provide those meals in creative, but unfortunately more costly ways, such as delivering prepackaged meals along bus routes or directly to students in their homes so that they won't be hungry. We all know how important the school breakfast and school lunch programs are to our low-income families. When colleges and universities made the very tough decision to send students home for the semester, I spoke with several presidents in Maine, and they told me about the steps they were taking to make sure that their students could still receive a quality education, albeit online or remotely. They were also taking steps, as well they should, to reimburse students and their families for room and board, and they've shortened travel study programs. They're investing in the software and hardware infrastructures to bring classes online quickly. They're doing even more than that, Mr. President. The University of Maine, for example, has partnered with the state to prepare its dorms and its facilities for emergency uses if necessary. So the direct aid to colleges and universities is needed to help these institutions offset these sudden revenue losses and unexpected costs. There's also temporary flexibility applied to student aid, to student loans that also will be very helpful. This agreement, Mr. President, is not only a lifeline for workers, small businesses, and schools. It builds on the previous two packages that Congress has passed to promote the health and safety of Americans. It makes substantial investment in our nation's health system, biomedical research, and education, including a $130 billion infusion for our hospitals and healthcare providers that are struggling to cope with this influx of patients, and it provides $20 billion for additional resources for veterans' health care. It authorizes an $11 billion catalyst toward the development of an effective vaccine and therapeutics, effective treatments for those struck by this virus. It provides $1 billion for community services block grants to support critical social service programs for millions of low-income individuals. It gives the Centers for Disease Control additional funding to enhance its vital work. It assists communities responding to greater services with an increase of $5 billion for community development block grants. That comes from the subcommittee that I chair. It helps with transit systems. There's widespread help for those who are homeless, who are among some of the most vulnerable in our population. It strengthens the low-income home heating assistance program. That's something that Senator Jack Reed and I have long worked together on. We don't want families and seniors making impossible choices between heating their homes and buying food or medicine. This package also contains 2 additional pieces of legislation that I've introduced and championed. First, it contains provisions from the Mitigating Emergency Drug Shortages, or MEDS Act, legislation I authored that will help prevent a shortage of vital medications. I was shocked, Mr. President, to learn that 72% of the facilities that make vital, active pharmaceutical ingredients for our market here in America are located overseas. 13% of these facilities in China. We just can't have that, and we need far greater visibility into that supply system. It also contains a bill that I have long advocated for, the Home Health Care Planning Improvement Act. It will allow nurse practitioners, physician assistants, and others to certify patients as needing home health services. Now it's just a physician that can do it, even though a physician might not be the primary care provider, particularly in rural areas. So that will remove needless delays in getting Medicare patients the home health care that they need. That's a critical improvement at a time when our healthcare system's being put to the test and when people are being told they need to stay in their own homes to avoid spreading the virus. The list of benefits that will be felt in communities across the country goes on and on. Mr. President, it's imperative that we pass this bill tonight. Every day, more small businesses are forced to close their doors. Every day, Americans are losing their jobs and their income. Every day, medical professionals are increasingly overwhelmed by the exponential rise in cases. The package we are voting on to advance tonight will bolster our healthcare system, infuse funds into biomedical research that will ultimately produce a vaccine and effective treatments, shore up our economy and our businesses, support those who are unemployed, strengthen the link between employers and their employees, save millions of jobs of those employed by small businesses, and help prevent a devastating recession, perhaps even a depression in this country. Let us not squander this momentum when we're so close to getting this done for the American people. I urge my colleagues to join me in passing this critical legislation. Thank you, Madam President.